Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Alpine Intel's The Savvy Adjuster podcast, where we discuss some of the insurance-related topics important to adjusters with the experts who know them best. I'm your host, Senior Account Manager Chris Nichols. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Alpine Intel, we are dedicated to innovation across property, auto, liability, and workers' comp insurance fields, helping our customers reach peak performance through the policy life cycle. Our operating brands are respected as industry leaders for not only our scale, but our track record of conducting expert, specialized, and accurate investigations. Among our suite of services is National Fire Experts, or NFE, which will be our focus today on the podcast. Now, NFE investigators use a thorough 11-step investigation process to provide the most actionable origin and cause reports in the industry. Now, a quick disclaimer before we jump in. Each claim obviously is unique, and on this podcast, we'll be speaking in kind of general terms, if you will. It's always important to get an expert assessment to make sure you have all the facts you need to make settlement decisions that account for all the facts unique to that claim. For this episode, I'm thrilled to be welcoming Mark Howard, who is a certified fire investigator with National Fire Experts, to the podcast. He's here to give us some insight into kitchen fires, how they start, what fire investigators look for, and what adjusters should know before they reach settlement decisions. Mark, thank you so much for taking some time today and joining us.
Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely. Well, before we dive into the main episode, the meat and potatoes of everything, would you mind terribly just giving us a little bit of background, your background in fire investigation?
Sure. So, like Chris said, I'm Mark Howard. I'm a certified fire investigator. I was a firefighter for 24 years. 3 of those was the volunteer fire department, and then I was fortunate enough to become a paid firefighter for the rest of my firefighting career. And in 2009, I was still in the fire service and joined Donan as a part-time fire investigator. And then in 2012, I retired from the fire service and joined as a full-time fire investigator with Donan. And so throughout most of my firefighting career, I've been involved in fire investigations, and now that's transferred into National Fire Experts and Alpine Intel.
Awesome. Well, we are, it sounds like, in very good hands, very knowledgeable hands here today. And again, thank you for joining us. So, Mark, you're obviously deeply involved in the investigation process. But before we cover what you might look for on site, let's talk a little bit about what you've noticed adjusters want to know when they're handling kitchen fire claims.
Sure. So a lot of times for the adjusters, one of the most important things is how quick can you get there? And that's one of the things that NFE does is we try to have a 2-day, at least 2 days within, or be on site within 2 days, sorry. But beyond that, it depends on which kind of adjuster you're working with. Property adjusters, they want to know, do I have subrogation potential? Do we have a product liability issue, or is there a repair that went faulty, or in a landlord tenant situation, is the tenant responsible for negligent for my fire? If you're working for a liability adjuster, then oftentimes their concern is our insured liable for the fire?
Sure, and I have to ask you too. You kind of touched on it. The time to cite is really important. The spoliation of evidence. We have had past subjects or past episodes on fire investigation here last year, and the fire investigators let me know about the proverbial go bag. Do you have a go bag where you can leave within an hour? Do you have it pre-packed and everything with it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have a company vehicle, so pretty much my cameras are charged 24/7, and
Okay.
all I got to do is figure out where I'm going, how long it's going to take me to get there, and out the door I go.
Awesome. Yeah, it's things you don't think about until you're talking with the experts that are doing these investigations. That again, that time to cite, being ready at a moment's notice is always important. So I appreciate you giving a little insight as far as what adjusters want to know when they're handling the kitchen fire claims. So, in your experience, what would you say are the biggest fire hazards or points of origin in kitchen fires? Maybe a top 2, 3 that you kind of see.
I would say the biggest thing is in the kitchen fires does surround the ranges. More so the range cooktop seems to be most prevalent, or more frequent, I should say. Then you've got ovens, fires in ovens. And then you've got coffee pots that are in kitchens. You've got air fryers that are in kitchens. All kinds of different devices nowadays. But one of the biggest things that I've been seeing lately is that people use the range cooktop as a storage place. So they'll come in from the grocery store and they put their plastic bags on top of the range top, or they had ordered a pizza and had pizza and leftover pizzas on there, and then the control knobs get inadvertently turned on, and then we end up having a fire.
Yeah, I am guilty of that. In fact, I think I did that yesterday, where and it's just too easy to bring the groceries in, set them on top of the stove while you're putting them away. Stove is next to the refrigerator, so that's a good call out for me to maybe just put them on the countertop
Yeah,
next to.
that would be better.
Yeah, absolutely. What about electrical issues? Do you see a decent amount of just kind of general electrical issues being a fire hazard or a point of origin in kitchen fires?
It can be. I've had experiences where you have some of the receptacles for the power cord for the range have caught fire. Um, Obviously, a lot of times in the kitchen, you've got countertop receptacles that, have coffee pots plugged in and this and that and different appliances that can also cause fires. So it's not, kitchen fires aren't just strictly related to uh, ranges. Candles are often used in kitchens that cause a problem sometimes. There's multitude of things that can cause a fire in a kitchen.
Sure. And you mentioned coffee pots again. We're guilty of having a coffee pot on the kitchen countertop. Does that fire traditionally start because of the coffee pot itself or because of the outlet that it's traditionally plugged into, if that makes sense?
Um, I would say several years ago it was more of a coffee pot issue. Um, but you don't see it a lot of times with the receptacles in a coffee pot.
Yeah, just from my own personal
Sure,
personal
sure.
knowledge, we use a lot of crock pots and things like that. I don't know if you
Yep,
know of crock pots things like that,
yep.
but yeah, we certainly use all of those in our
And a
daily.
lot, a lot of times you have that in older homes because the wiring is older, and back in those days they didn't have all the appliances that we have the luxury of having now that use more electricity that can cause problems.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. My house was built in 1925, so I have one of those. Well, I guess this year a 100-year-old house. So certainly worth keeping an eye on here where I live here. Um, so NFE fire investigators, I know you take a very systematic approach to fire investigations, right? So I'm assuming when you get to a house where there's been a kitchen fire and it's been reported, you don't just head straight for the kitchen. Again, this is me assuming, but you can speak to this. Can you walk us through a little bit about your overall investigation process?
Sure. I mean, the once you're on, and I'll start with once you're on site, you know, you investigate the fire from the exterior to the interior, working from the areas of least fire damage to the area of greatest fire damage. But part of that process is it sounds simple, but there's a lot more to it than that. When you're walking around the exterior of the house, you're looking for fire hazards. You're looking to see if the walls collapsed, or it's open, or the roof's collapsed, and you got to watch that when you go inside. I like to once you meet the insured that's there, I do the walk around the outside of the house, and then I asked them, I said, let me do a quick walk through of the house, so that'll help me ask better questions with regards to the fire or what took place. And what that also does is it also gives me an idea of where the least areas of damage are and where the most areas of damage are, and also helps better ask questions pertaining to the fire. So
Sure.
once you do that, then you're going back out and you're, um, getting background information from the insured, uh, asking details about what led up, what they noticed, what they heard, if they were home, what they heard, what they saw, what they were doing. It's all part of the investigation process that an FPA 921 has, that's called the systematic approach, which is the scientific method. So there are several steps with that this all incorporates in with doing that. And then What NFE does is we will photograph the scene from top to bottom, least to most. And then we also do a 3D imaging scan of the structure. And that helps us also document the damage that's taken place.
And that's the Matterport scan, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And so for people unfamiliar, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Matterport scans really are similar to taking a tour of a house virtually on a real estate's website, correct? You can go through room by room, click the arrows, and it's really kind of a full view of the fire investigation scene. Is that relatively accurate?
Yes, that's exactly what the Matterport scan is. But it also we can obtain floor plans from that, and there's other estimating tools that we can offer to assist adjusters with those things too that come from the Matterport.
Sure. Well, and I can only assume it's important for the adjuster to have that scan sometimes because of items being claimed, right? You know, if they say they had a 85-inch Sony flat screen TV, and instead when you're going through that scan you see a 1972 tube TV, I'm sure that's probably handy to for the adjuster to have as far as contents being claimed, things like that. So.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it does a lot of things. It does that for the adjuster. And then there may be that, hey, I missed something when I was there, or the independent adjuster missed something there. They can go back through and they can look at the scan and say, okay, this is what was there. It helps us document the scene as we first saw it, because those scans are done before you ever dig any debris. So it kind of, along with your photographs that you're taking, it shows exactly what you saw when you arrived at the site.
Before anything has been disturbed, like you said, removing
Exactly.
items, walking through the scene. Well, it sounds like a very important tool for adjusters and fire investigators, and offered through NFE here. So you mentioned talking to the insured. Were you home at the time of the fire? Did you see anything? Did you see smoke? How often are you interviewing neighbors, other people, maybe local authorities? Does that come into play on a decent amount of fire investigations?
It does sometimes. You're also nowadays too, you're looking at see who's got security cameras outside, and you're looking to see who has ring cameras, or does this person have ring cameras, or what kind of electronic devices even your insured might have in the house that can lend some information onto the fire. Um, Sometimes the areas that we go into, it kind of limits that opportunity to do neighborhood canvases type thing, but it is also something that we do on a regular basis as well.
Sure. Yeah, I always forget about the ring cameras. It's hard to escape those things. I know my neighborhood that I live in has except for our house, I should probably get on it, but everybody else has ring cameras, so we've got a constant thread of, hey, did anybody see anything on their ring camera? I had a package removed, things like that. So I'm sure that lends some additional information as well, which is always handy. Um, so you mentioned we're talking about fire patterns a little bit. Reading those is obviously clearly a skill that investigators like yourself have honed with obviously a lot of education, but years of experience. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what fire patterns in kitchens can tell you.
Okay, sure. So fire patterns anywhere in a structure are part of the documentation process and the evaluation to help you assist with where the origin of the fire might be, right? So in a kitchen, since we're talking mainly about range fires, um, I would say the most common fire pattern you see is what they call a V pattern. And that's exactly how it sounds. If you picture a V with the point down to the bottom, and picture a skillet or a cooking pan on the range top, the fire spreads upward and outward from that if it starts from that area of the range top. Let's put it that way. So vice versa, if you've got a coffee pot that's 4 or 5 feet away from the range in the kitchen, and the fire patterns are greater over there or more drastic, then maybe we've got a fire that starts over there and not at the range. So it's all part of the process of trying to hone back into where the fire actually started.
So you mentioned the V shape. fire pattern, are there any other names of patterns, outside of V that you guys use traditionally?
Sure, there's a lot of different kinds of patterns, depending on whether it's on the wall or on the floor, that kind of thing. With regards to a range fire, there's what they call an hourglass pattern. And this often occurs when you have a range that's situated in a corner, where you have two walls, or one wall on the side and one wall on the back, and then the fire hits both walls plus the ceiling. So, there's numerous kinds of patterns throughout a structure.
Sure. Are there any differences in patterns, whether it's an electrical, a mechanical, or maybe just a human caused fire?
Yes. Um, when you're talking about humans involvement, more so in an intentionally fire, you can have irregular shape patterns on the floor. You can have holes. You can have fires in one room of a house and there's no damage in between the hallway getting to the other end of the house, and then there's another fire in that room. So those patterns are different. That would be a case where two fires don't communicate with each other and there's two separate fires.
Sure. Well, then it speaks to hiring somebody like NFE, where we are skilled in investigations like that and determining, the shapes, locations, if it is human caused or not. So, are there any circumstances? I'm just kind of curious where you, as the fire investigator, may need support to bring the adjuster all the origin and cause answers you need, specifically in talking about maybe like analyzing samples or debris or residue. Can you speak a little bit to support that you may need?
Absolutely. So when we're back to a fire involving a range, you may have to take a debris sample from the contents that's on top of the range, and send that to a lab for analysis, to detect for vegetable oil or fatty acids that's common in foods that you're trying to see whether they actually had cooking oil in the pan like they said they did. Um, Another part of that is you could also be taking floor samples from the area of kitchen where either something was dripped from the pan that they tried to move off the range top, or maybe there was something else there. But a lab can tell you that. Um, there are times when you'll have, if you have to go back for a joint study and you've got a manufacturer on notice to come to the site as well, you may actually have an electrical engineer come along with you at that time, or electrical engineer may be involved later at a lab study. So just all depends on the circumstances.
Sure. Can we speak a little bit too? I'm just kind of curious about, residue and debris like we were talking about. How does NFE collect those items and ensure they safely reach the lab?
Okay, so with the debris sample, we typically put those in gallon containers. They're tape sealed, and then we ship those through means like UPS or FedEx that has tracking numbers to the lab, directly to the lab. Once we receive approval from the client to do so, um, then that goes to the lab, um, and then once the lab's done with it, they'll ship that directly to our one of our CTL storage facilities. When it comes to regards to collecting the range itself, that's a pretty large item. So oftentimes, um, investigators will get a trailer and they'll take that range from to a local storage facility, but then they contact our loss logistics department, and loss logistics will come, we'll schedule an appointment. They'll come and get the range from us, and then they take it to our component testing laboratories. This is we're stored secure storage facility, for further testing or storage, either one. So it all stays in the hands of someone that's associated with the Alpine Intel brand.
Sure. And I'm assuming that's important because the least amount of fingerprints you can have on evidence, and I use fingerprints as just a general term, but least amount of fingerprints, I'm assuming the better.
Yeah, as much as you can keep it in-house and not have independent contractors involved in the transfer of that evidence is better, I think, because it's all in-house.
Sure. And I appreciate you mentioning the component testing laboratories we have, one outside of Louisville, one outside of Las Vegas, and also our loss logistics um, transportation program that we have here. It's just all part, like you said, of the NFE and Alpine Intel brand, keeping it kind of in-house and that chain of command disrupted as little as possible. Um,
Exactly.
so, as we near the end of the episode, I'm always kind of curious. We like to finish up with real examples of assessments our guests have conducted. Just at the beginning of the episode, you mentioned your vast experience, whether it be being working for the fire department or with Donan slash NFE now. Uh, can you give us some examples, or and specifically, are there any kitchen fire investigations that stand out to you as maybe particularly interesting or complicated, or maybe just a good example of what NFE can do with these assignments?
Sure, there's a lot of them that come to mind, but one that kind of depicts a lot of what Alpine and its brands can do together is one that comes to mind to me. This particular scenario was a multifamily dwelling that end up being joint site studies at the lost site, and and a range actually had to be collected along with other evidence, large evidence. So that evidence was transported to a local storage facility by myself, and then Lost Logistics was contacted and took that evidence to our component testing lab in Kentucky. And then from then, and plus when we got the site study, we had an electrical engineer there. And once the evidence made it to CTL, then a lab joint study was scheduled and further testing was done on those appliances and evidence that was collected to get a result, or to the client. So in that one particular fire, we had fire investigation, NFE, we had Donan engineers involved, we had Lost Logistics involved, and we had CTL involved, which is all in-house. So kind of covers a lot of how our brands can work together.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic example of how the Alpine Intel suite of services can work together for sure. Any kitchen fire investigations that maybe are, I don't want to call them, you know, well, I'll call them interesting, unique maybe, if you will, or just very complicated that you can think of. I know you probably have a million examples, but anything kind of stand out that you're like, that one was an interesting one.
Uh, yeah. I mean, you you can have fires where damage is so severe that the control knob stems are gone, and you got to have lab testing to do. You can have fires where you can still see some of the control knobs and some of them are on. Um, and you talk to an elderly individual and they say, "Oh yeah, I was cooking," and everything that they're telling you matches up to the fire patterns and the evidence that you're seeing, that yeah, it did start on the range top. And then you make contact with the fire department, and they say, "Did you know this is her fourth fire and her third house, and it all started on the range?" So those kind of things you run into from time to time too.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. Well, I think to your point, that's where your skill set as a fire investigator comes into play with, doing additional interviews, not only with the insured, right, which is valuable. And she told you that she was cooking at the time, that checks out, but then also talking with local agencies, things like that, to give you that second layer of information of, hey, this is not the first time this has happened. I'm sure that's all valuable information, I would imagine. Um, so we just to kind of end the episode here, I and I admittedly forgot to ask about this before, but we've really revamped our our fire reports recently over the last year, and actually won some awards through Property Casualty 360's Luminary Awards. So I was hoping we could speak a little bit about the advanced, or I should say enhanced reports that include more plausible and probable origin and cause for you, and just kind of speak to some of the features they may see on our new reports here.
Sure. So we call those the actionable reports. They're a short report. One of the things that our clients like is we try for a 5-day turnaround or workday turnaround on those, so that there's not a delay in getting the reports to the clients. That's one big thing that they like. But yes, it does give you. So let's use the kitchen scenario again. Okay, so maybe we collected the range, and we collected the coffee pot that was right next to it. We collected the receptacle that the coffee pot was plugged into. Maybe in this one that the knobs are turned, or where you can't tell whether the range was on or not. So you need further study. So in that one, those reports will give you the most plausible cause of the fire would be that the cooktop element or cooktop burner was in the on position, but you can't tell what the knob is, the control knob is, whether it was on or off. So you need further study. So, and then it'll give you, okay, the next plausible might be the coffee pot, or the next plausible might be the receptacle that the coffee pot's plugged into. So it gives the client recommendations, as to what the next steps are to actually confirm what that cause of fire is, or it may have only one plausible hypothesis because you know what caused the fire.
Sure.
Those reports also, they come with you get 3 embedded photos in the report, and then there's 10 photos at the end of the report that help caption photos that help explain what you're seeing to the client.
Yeah. I think my understanding, a big knock on past reports, maybe not even just with Donan / National Fire Experts, just a lot of fire investigation companies out there. You'd get a report back and it would say cause unknown, and that really doesn't help a lot of things. So I think us adding all the probable and plausible origin and cause to our reports gives, as you mentioned, more actionable information for the adjuster to use. So, and I do know also, just to speak to a little bit about why we were nominated for that award as well, is that, like you said, time to site is so important. So we lean on a lot of the scheduling efficiencies that HVACI and Strike Check, our sister companies, have to really connect with the insured in a quicker manner, get those things scheduled, and get an investigator out to the site. So all good things is the point of that. So awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all the valuable information. Appreciate you joining us here today, Mark.
Thank you.
And of course, thanks to our listeners. Obviously, our show notes are going to include additional resources about kitchen fires and, of course, NFE investigations. You can also explore a variety of insurance-related resources, or simply just submit an assignment to us or any of Alpine Intel's brands at our website, which is alpineintel.com. And finally, it goes without saying, but if you liked what you heard today, make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for everybody who's joining us here today, and we'll see you next time.